Have you ever wondered what secrets lie buried beneath the floorboards of those grand old southern mansions? The kind of secrets that wealthy families would rather die than have exposed. Tonight, I'm going to tell you about documents discovered in an abandoned courthouse in eastern Tennessee. Auction lists that revealed a horror so profound that historians have struggled to acknowledge its existence. Before we continue with this disturbing tale, take a moment to comment where you're watching from. This channel depends on supporters like you to continue bringing these forgotten horrors to light. Subscribe now if you haven't already. These are the stories they don't want told. The summer of 1855 brought record heat to Cumberland County, Tennessee. The kind of heat that seemed to slow time itself, where even the insects fell silent during the scorching midday hours. Nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, the Blackwood Plantation stood as a monument to wealth accumulated over 3 generations. Its white columns gleamed beneath the merciless sun, visible for miles across the valley. Thomas Blackwood, at 57 years of age, was the 3rd-generation owner of the 1,200-acre plantation. A widower for 7 years, he had transformed from a jovial businessman into a reclusive figure who rarely ventured beyond his property lines. His only son, William, had died in a hunting accident 4 years prior, leaving the Blackwood legacy without a clear heir. What neighbors and business associates didn't know was that Thomas Blackwood had been meticulously planning for the continuation of his bloodline through means that would have shocked even the most callous of his contemporaries. County Clerk James Morrison first noticed inconsistencies in the property auction records in early July. Morrison, a meticulous man who had served Cumberland County for 23 years, discovered discrepancies while organizing documents for the quarterly court session. "I remember feeling uneasy when I noticed the first alteration," Morrison would later write in his personal journal. "The handwriting was similar enough to fool a casual observer, but I had been reviewing these documents for decades. Someone had deliberately modified the buyer's name on 3 separate auction listings from June. What troubled me more was that the properties in question were all adjacent to Blackwood land." Morrison initially dismissed the discrepancies as clerical errors, making notes to have his assistant review the original documents. His concern might have ended there had he not received a letter from Ezekiel Harper, a land broker from Nashville, inquiring about properties he claimed to have purchased but never received deeds for. Harper wrote, "I have enclosed copies of my receipts for the purchase of the Bennett, Calhoun, and Willoughby parcels, all acquired at the June 7th auction. I have made 3 attempts to collect the deeds from your office without success. My patience grows thin, Mr. Morrison, as my clients have substantial development plans for these properties." The receipts Harper provided appeared authentic, yet Morrison's records now showed Thomas Blackwood as the buyer of all 3 properties. More disturbing was that Morrison himself remembered Blackwood being absent from that particular auction. Troubled by this discovery, Morrison decided to investigate privately before bringing the matter to the county judge. He began by reviewing all property transactions involving Thomas Blackwood over the previous 2 years. What he discovered would eventually expose a conspiracy that reached beyond simple property fraud. Since his son's death, Blackwood had systematically acquired 17 properties throughout Cumberland and neighboring Roane County. Each purchase followed a similar pattern. The properties had belonged to families with unmarried daughters between the ages of 16 and 21. In 14 of these cases, the families had remained on the land as tenants after the sale. On a sweltering Thursday afternoon, Morrison decided to visit one such property, the former Abernathy Farm. The once prosperous homestead had fallen into disrepair following the death of Harold Abernathy 3 years earlier. His widow and 2 daughters had sold the property to Blackwood the previous autumn and continued living there as tenants. Morrison found Sarah Abernathy, the widow, hanging laundry behind the weathered farmhouse. She appeared startled by his arrival, her eyes darting nervously toward the main house before greeting him. "Mrs. Abernathy, I'm reviewing some county records and had questions about your property arrangement with Mr. Blackwood," Morrison explained, noting her obvious discomfort. "We're grateful for Mr. Blackwood's generosity," she replied mechanically, as though reciting practiced words. "We couldn't maintain the property after Harold's passing." When Morrison inquired about her eldest daughter, Rebecca, Mrs. Abernathy's hands began to tremble visibly. She's been invited to stay at the Blackwood estate. A tremendous opportunity for a girl of her background. She helps with Mr. Blackwood's correspondence and household matters. "Does she ever visit home?" Morrison asked. Mrs. Abernathy's expression hardened. "We're not to discuss Rebecca's arrangements. It was part of our agreement with Mr. Blackwood. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have chores to finish before nightfall." As Morrison turned to leave, he noticed a young girl, presumably the younger Abernathy daughter, watching from an upstairs window. The look of absolute terror on her face would haunt Morrison for years to come. Over the following week, Morrison discreetly visited 3 other families who had sold their properties to Blackwood. Each conversation followed a disturbingly similar pattern. An unmarried daughter had been invited to live at the Blackwood estate, and the families appeared unwilling or unable to discuss the arrangements further. Morrison's investigation might have continued methodically had fate not intervened in the form of Jeremiah Wilson, a former slave overseer at the Blackwood Plantation. Wilson had been dismissed 2 months earlier and sought Morrison out at his home one evening, clearly intoxicated and agitated. "You've been asking questions about old Blackwood," Wilson slurred, the stench of whiskey heavy on his breath. "There's things happening in that house that God himself would turn away from." Morrison invited Wilson inside, away from potential eavesdroppers, and listened to a tale that defied his darkest imaginings. "Blackwood's obsessed with his family name," Wilson explained, periodically glancing over his shoulder as though expecting to find someone listening. "After William died, something broke in the old man. Started talking about bloodlines and legacy like a man possessed. According to Wilson, Blackwood had brought 7 young women to live at the main house over the past 3 years. They were kept in the East Wing, their movements restricted and monitored by trusted house slaves who answered directly to Blackwood. "He calls them his special guests," Wilson continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But they're prisoners, plain and simple. The girl from the Abernathy place, she tried to escape twice. After the second time, Blackwood had her moved to the old overseer's cabin. Nobody's seen her since April." Most disturbing was Wilson's account of Blackwood's nightly ritual. Every evening after dinner, he reviews his ledgers and these strange genealogical charts. He's mapping bloodlines, who married who going back generations. Says he's seeking advantageous combinations. Talks about his grandchildren like they already exist. When Morrison pressed for more specific information, Wilson grew increasingly paranoid. "I've said too much. Blackwood has friends in the state legislature, in the banks. He'll know I came to you." With that, Wilson stumbled back into the night, refusing Morrison's offer of lodging. 2 days later, Wilson was found dead in the Cumberland River, his body showing signs of severe beating before drowning. The local sheriff attributed the death to a drunken brawl and robbery, but Morrison suspected a more sinister explanation. Now genuinely fearful but unable to ignore his suspicions, Morrison decided to approach Judge Nathaniel Holbrook, a long-time friend and the most powerful legal authority in the county. Holbrook listened gravely to Morrison's findings, but cautioned against making accusations without irrefutable evidence. "Thomas Blackwood can destroy both of us with a word," Holbrook warned. "If what you suspect is true, we need absolute proof. Document everything, James. Leave nothing to hearsay." With the judge's tentative support, Morrison intensified his investigation. He began reconstructing the modified auction records, comparing them with receipts from buyers and tax documents. A pattern emerged. Blackwood had systematically falsified ownership records for at least 22 properties over 3 years, all while maintaining the original owners as tenants. The breakthrough came when Morrison discovered a hidden compartment in his office desk containing original documents that had been removed and replaced with altered versions. Among these was a letter from Blackwood to Judge Holbrook that shattered any illusion of finding justice through official channels. "My dear Nathaniel," the letter began in Blackwood's distinctive handwriting, "I trust your daughter Elizabeth is enjoying her time in Philadelphia. Such a beautiful girl of 17 should have every opportunity for refinement. I would be most disappointed if your investigation into certain county records were to continue. Some matters are best left undisturbed by public servants who wish to see their families thrive." The threat was unmistakable. Morrison realized with growing horror that Judge Holbrook had betrayed him, likely warning Blackwood of the investigation immediately after their conversation. That night, Morrison carefully gathered the most damning evidence into a satchel and prepared to leave for Nashville, where he hoped to present his findings to federal authorities. He never made it past the county line. Historical accounts differ on what happened next. The official record states that James Morrison, overcome by financial troubles and alcoholism, set fire to the county records office before taking his own life. The fire destroyed hundreds of property records, dating back decades, necessitating a complex reconstruction of ownership claims that would occupy the courts for years. What this sanitized history omits is the partial journal Morrison had entrusted to his sister in Knoxville days before his death. These writings, discovered in 1927 during a home renovation, paint a vastly different picture of events. "I fear I have stumbled upon a conspiracy far more extensive than mere property fraud," Morrison wrote in his final entry. "Blackwood is not alone in his machinations. At least 3 other prominent families appear complicit in what I can only describe as a breeding program. They speak of genetic refinement and securing advantageous traits as though discussing livestock rather than human beings. Most disturbing are the references to the list, apparently a record of young women throughout the region categorized by physical attributes, family medical history, and temperament. Those deemed suitable are systematically acquired through financial coercion of their families, always maintaining the appearance of propriety through elaborate legal fictions. God forgive me for not seeing it sooner. The altered auction records were merely the visible edge of a horror that may have been ongoing for generations. The journal broke off mid-entry, leaving the full extent of the conspiracy unknown. What is known is that following Morrison's death and the destruction of the county records, Thomas Blackwood's influence expanded dramatically. Within 5 years, he had doubled his landholdings and constructed a second, larger mansion deeper within his property, far from public roads or prying eyes. Census records from 1860 show 27 unmarried women between the ages of 16 and 25 living at Blackwood properties, listed variously as domestic help, private tutors, or relatives. None appear in subsequent public records. By 1870, the Blackwood estate had become essentially a small, private fiefdom. Local authorities deferred to Blackwood on virtually all matters within his expanding territory. Rumors circulated among neighboring communities about strange sounds carrying across the valley at night and about young women who entered Blackwood land never to be seen again. The Civil War and its aftermath provided convenient cover for many questionable activities during this period. Property records, birth certificates, and death notices were often lost or deliberately destroyed as Union and Confederate forces alternately controlled the region. This administrative chaos served the interests of families like the Blackwoods, allowing them to operate increasingly outside public scrutiny. In the autumn of 1873, a devastating fire destroyed the main Blackwood mansion. Thomas Blackwood, by then 75 years old, reportedly perished in the blaze, along with an unspecified number of household members. The ruins were never fully excavated, and the property was abandoned. For decades, the Blackwood conspiracy might have remained buried in history had it not been for a chance discovery in 1958. During the construction of a highway bypass near what had once been the edge of Blackwood property, workers uncovered a sealed underground chamber containing hundreds of documents, ledgers, correspondence, and most disturbingly, the infamous list referenced in Morrison's journal. Dr. Eleanor Harmon, a historian from the University of Tennessee who was granted brief access to these materials before they were mysteriously removed by federal authorities, described what she found. The documents reveal a multi-generational eugenics program dating back to at least 1830. Thomas Blackwood inherited not just the plantation, but also this grotesque human experiment from his father and grandfather. The auction lists were carefully manufactured legal instruments designed to give the appearance of legitimate property transactions, while actually facilitating the acquisition of young women selected for specific genetic traits. Most disturbing were the birth records, clinical, dispassionate documentation of children born to these imprisoned women, complete with physical assessments and decisions about their fates. Those deemed acceptable were integrated into prominent families through arranged marriages or adoptions. Those who failed to meet the program's standards simply disappeared from the records. The level of sophistication in their understanding of heredity predates Mendel's widely accepted discoveries by decades. They were selectively breeding humans based on principles that mainstream science had not yet formalized. The question that haunts me is, where did this knowledge come from, and how far did this network extend beyond Tennessee? Dr. Harmon's academic career ended abruptly following her brief report. University records cite health concerns for her early retirement, though former colleagues reported she was in excellent health when she suddenly relocated without providing a forwarding address. The documents she briefly examined have never been made available to other researchers or acknowledged in official records. The highway construction continued after a brief delay, and the entrance to the underground chamber was sealed beneath tons of concrete and asphalt. Today, nothing remains of the Blackwood estate except overgrown foundations and local legends. Hikers occasionally report hearing women's voices calling for help near the ruins, though such accounts are dismissed as overactive imaginations influenced by campfire tales. What cannot be so easily dismissed are the genealogical peculiarities that persist among certain families descended from that region. Distinctive physical traits, unusual eye colors, rare blood types, and extraordinary longevity appear with statistical improbability among descendants of families connected to the Blackwoods. More troubling are the sealed court records related to a series of medical research projects conducted between 1942 and 1975 at a private facility near the former Blackwood property. Former employees, speaking anonymously, have described experiments involving special bloodlines and genetic outliers sourced primarily from orphanages throughout the Southeast. The facility was abruptly closed following a congressional investigation that itself remains classified. Satellite imagery shows the buildings were completely demolished, the debris removed, and the entire area replanted with native forest, an unusually thorough erasure even by government standards. In 2008, a graduate student researching Tennessee land use history discovered a curious pattern. Property boundaries surrounding the former Blackwood estate had been systematically redrawn over generations to create a perfect circle 7 miles in diameter. At the center of this circle stands an unmarked research facility accessible only via a private road with military-grade security measures. When questioned, local officials invariably claim ignorance about the facility's purpose or ownership. Tax records show the land registered to a series of shell corporations that change every few years, though property taxes are always paid promptly. Perhaps most disturbing are the periodic reports from surrounding communities of young women who disappear while hiking or camping near the former Blackwood property. Local authorities attribute these disappearances to mountainous terrain and wild animal attacks, though no bodies are ever recovered. A former sheriff's deputy, speaking on condition of anonymity, offered a different perspective. "We were explicitly instructed never to extend searches into the restricted zone, regardless of where tracking dogs led. My supervisor told me directly, those woods have been off-limits since before the Civil War. Some boundaries aren't meant to be crossed." In 2015, an anonymous whistleblower claiming to be a security contractor at the mysterious facility uploaded hundreds of files to various internet platforms before disappearing. Though the files were quickly removed from mainstream sites, they continued to circulate on encrypted networks. These documents suggested that Thomas Blackwood's death in 1873 had been fabricated. More incredibly, they contained surveillance photographs purportedly showing an elderly man resembling historical images of Blackwood entering the facility as recently as 2012. Independent verification of these claims has proven impossible. Journalists and researchers who pursue the story too aggressively report intimidation, surveillance, and in some cases, criminal charges seemingly unrelated to their investigations. What remains beyond dispute is that the original auction lists, those first altered documents that aroused James Morrison's suspicions, have never been found. Like so many pieces of this dark puzzle, they have been systematically erased from public record. Yet echoes remain. Throughout the southeastern United States, certain old families maintain curious traditions, meticulous genealogical record-keeping, carefully arranged marriages, and an unusual preoccupation with specific physical traits among potential spouses for their children. They are families who can trace their wealth to the mid-19th century, but who rarely appear in historical accounts. Families whose members occupy positions of quiet influence rather than public prominence. Families who, generation after generation, produce children with remarkable talents, unusual longevity, and distinctive features that harken back to descriptions in Morrison's recovered journal fragments. Are these merely coincidences, the mundane patterns of privileged families maintaining their bloodlines? Or do they represent the visible surface of Thomas Blackwood's legacy, a systematic program of human selective breeding that continues in secrecy to this day? The answers may lie in courthouse basements and private archives throughout Tennessee and beyond, if one knows where to look and is willing to face the consequences of disturbing secrets buried for generations. Perhaps the most chilling possibility is that Blackwood's vision extended far beyond his own lifetime, that somewhere, in climate-controlled vaults beneath unassuming buildings, modern custodians of his work continue to maintain and update the list, still identifying, acquiring, and exploiting young women for a program whose true purpose remains unknown. For those who dismiss such notions as conspiracy theories, consider this: when county officials finally allowed limited access to records salvaged from the 1855 courthouse fire, researchers discovered that an unusually high number of young women from specific family lines simply vanished from public records during that period. No death certificates, no marriage records, no census entries. They simply ceased to exist on paper, as though systematically erased. More disturbing still, their families often experienced sudden financial reversals, crippling debts mysteriously resolved, foreclosures unexpectedly cancelled, legal troubles abruptly dismissed. The price of these miracles may have been paid in human lives. The summer heat in Cumberland County still brings a heavy silence in the midday hours. Locals say that if you stand at the edge of what was once Blackwood land on such days, you can sometimes hear faint voices carried on the breeze, women calling names that appear in no family Bible or headstone in any cemetery, names that may belong to children born in shadows and raised in secrecy, children whose descendants might walk among us, unknowing carriers of Thomas Blackwood's dark legacy. Authorities maintain there is nothing unusual about the restricted area that was once Blackwood Plantation. They attribute the persistent legends to overactive imaginations and the human tendency to create patterns where none exist. Perhaps they are right. Or perhaps, even now, somewhere in Tennessee, a modern curator reviews auction records of foreclosed properties, seeking families with daughters who possess the traits outlined in a document older than the nation itself. Listen carefully. In the silence that follows this tale, consider what secrets might lie hidden in your own family history. What bargains made in desperate times might still bind your bloodline to unseen masters. And remember, some doors once opened can never truly be closed again. The discovery of altered auction lists in Cumberland County was merely the beginning of a horror that would span generations. As we continue this dark journey, we delve deeper into the shadowy legacy of Thomas Blackwood and the sinister breeding program that may continue to this day. In the spring of 1856, nearly a year after James Morrison's suspicious death, a traveling physician named Dr. Samuel Whitaker arrived in Cumberland County. Ostensibly there to establish a rural practice, Whitaker's true purpose was quite different. He had been Morrison's classmate at medical school in Philadelphia and had received a sealed letter from his old friend days before Morrison's death. The letter, which Whitaker would later transcribe in his private journal, contained explosive allegations. "My dear Samuel, if you are reading this, I have likely met with misfortune. What began as an investigation into property fraud has revealed something far more monstrous. Thomas Blackwood and at least 7 other prominent families across Tennessee, Georgia, and the Carolinas appear engaged in an organized effort to selectively breed human beings for specific traits. They acquire young women through financial coercion of vulnerable families, falsifying property records to create a paper trail that disguises their true purpose. Most disturbing is their scientific methodology, which far exceeds current understanding of heredity. Their documents reference genetic principles not yet established in medical literature. I cannot help but wonder, what is the source of this knowledge, and to what end are they applying it? I entrust you with copies of the most damning evidence, hidden beneath the 3rd floorboard from the eastern wall in my sister's parlor in Knoxville. Should anything happen to me, I beg you to continue this investigation with the utmost discretion. These men will not hesitate to eliminate those who threaten their work." Whitaker, initially skeptical of claims that seemed fantastical, found his doubt evaporating when he recovered the hidden documents. Among them was a partial copy of the list, a meticulous catalogue of young women throughout the region with detailed assessments of their physical characteristics, family medical histories, and behavioral traits. Most chilling was the clinical language used to describe these women, reminiscent of livestock breeding records. Notes in the margins evaluated genetic potential and compatibility with Blackwood lineage, alongside references to previous successful pairings in specific family lines. Recognizing the danger of confronting such powerful interests directly, Whitaker established himself as the area's new doctor, slowly building trust while conducting his investigation under the guise of public health research. His position gave him unique access to family medical histories and allowed him to track patterns that would have remained invisible to others. Over 18 months, Whitaker documented 37 cases of young women who had ostensibly accepted positions at the Blackwood estate or related properties owned by Blackwood associates. In each case, the women's families had experienced sudden financial salvation following their daughter's departure. Foreclosed farms mysteriously redeemed, deathbed tax payments miraculously submitted, criminal charges inexplicably dismissed. Whitaker's most significant breakthrough came through Sarah Jenkins, a house slave who had escaped from the Blackwood plantation during the chaos following Morrison's death and the courthouse fire. Jenkins had been responsible for attending to the special guests in the East Wing and provided horrifying first-hand accounts of their treatment. Mr. Blackwood would visit each girl's room at night with his ledger. Jenkins recounted in testimony Whitaker transcribed. He'd examine them like prize cattle, measuring their heads with calipers, recording their monthly cycles, noting any changes in appearance or temperament. Those who became with child were moved to the lower-level rooms, kept sedated with laudanum throughout their confinements. According to Jenkins, not all pregnancies were carried to term. Blackwood and a physician known only as Dr. Hamilton would sometimes perform procedures to terminate pregnancies that showed unfavorable signs, though Jenkins could not explain what criteria determined such decisions. Most disturbing was Jenkins' description of the underground chambers beneath the main house, accessible only through a hidden entrance in Blackwood's private study. These chambers, which Jenkins had glimpsed only once when ordered to deliver fresh linens, contained what appeared to be a medical facility far more advanced than anything available in rural Tennessee at that time. "It was like stepping into another world," Jenkins whispered, her voice trembling at the memory. Glass cabinets filled with specimens, organs preserved in jars, skeletons of infants with strange deformities, tables with straps and instruments I'd never seen before, and the walls covered with charts showing family trees going back generations, with certain names circled in red. When Whitaker pressed for more details about these family trees, Jenkins became visibly terrified. They weren't just Blackwood relations. I recognized names of the most powerful families across 3 states. It was like they were all part of the same terrible purpose. Jenkins disappeared 3 days after speaking with Whitaker. Local authorities conducted a perfunctory search before concluding she had likely continued north toward freedom. Whitaker, however, noted in his journal that her few possessions remained in the room he had secured for her, including a locket containing a braid of her daughter's hair, something no mother would willingly abandon. By early 1858, Whitaker had compiled enough evidence to justify contacting federal authorities. He carefully prepared duplicate documentation and arranged to meet with a Justice Department official in Nashville. The night before his planned departure, Whitaker's clinic was destroyed in a fire that local witnesses attributed to an unattended lamp. Whitaker's remains were supposedly found in the ashes, though later investigation would raise questions about the corpse's identity. What followed was a methodical erasure of evidence. Whitaker's records were seized by local authorities for investigation into possible medical malpractice. His correspondence was intercepted at the post office. Former patients who spoke favorably of the doctor suddenly found reasons to question his character and practices. Within months, the official narrative depicted Samuel Whitaker as a disreputable physician who had likely falsified his credentials and potentially harmed patients through incompetence or malice. His investigation into Blackwood and Associates was reduced to the delusional fantasies of a disturbed mind. Had Whitaker been more careful, his efforts might have died with him. But the doctor had taken one precaution that his enemies failed to discover. He had encoded his most damning findings in what appeared to be routine medical observations, sending these notes to 3 former classmates at 6-month intervals throughout his investigation. One such recipient, Dr. William Tennyson of Boston, recognized the unusual pattern in Whitaker's seemingly mundane letters. Using a decryption key they had developed as students, Tennyson uncovered the hidden message. Systematic breeding program ongoing across southern states. Minimum 7 generations documented. Subjects display unusual physical mental developments. Evidence suggests experiments originated before American Revolution. Children produced in program, placed in influential families, or eliminated based on exhibited traits. Religious mystical element suggested in private correspondence between principals. Referenced entity called the progenitor appears to guide selection criteria. Genetic knowledge far exceeds current science. Blackwood patriarch potentially not primary architect, but subordinate to larger design. Tennyson, understanding the implications and dangers, did not act immediately on this information. Instead, he preserved Whitaker's letters and added his own analysis, eventually bequeathing the collection to the Harvard Medical School archives, with instructions that they remain sealed until 1900. When the materials were finally examined at the turn of the century, most academics dismissed Whitaker's claims as 19th-century superstition filtered through an overactive imagination. A few, however, noted disturbing correlations with emerging theories of eugenics and recognized that some of the genetic principles described in Whitaker's notes predated their official discovery by decades. One such researcher, Dr. Margaret Winters, attempted to trace descendants of families named in Whitaker's documents. Her findings, published in an obscure medical journal in 1913 before being aggressively discredited, suggested peculiar patterns among these bloodlines. The descendants of what I have termed the Blackwood Circle display statistical anomalies that defy conventional explanation. Their average lifespan exceeds regional norms by 23 years. Incidence of common hereditary ailments appears virtually non-existent across multiple generations. Most notably, certain distinctive physical characteristics, a particular eye color described as amber with gold flecks, unusual height combined with disproportionate strength, and enhanced night vision, appear with remarkable consistency. Winters also documented what she called cognitive singularities among descendants, including accelerated language acquisition, exceptional mathematical ability, and an unusual capacity for influencing others through persuasion. Most concerning to Winters was the pattern of career choices and geographical distribution among these individuals. They gravitate toward positions of significant influence rather than public prominence, judges rather than politicians, advisors rather than military leaders, physicians rather than renowned academics. They establish themselves at crucial nexus points in society where decisions of consequence are made with minimal scrutiny. Their distribution across the eastern seaboard suggests not random migration, but strategic placement. Winters' research career ended abruptly following publication when evidence of falsified data mysteriously appeared in her previous studies. Though she maintained her innocence until her death in 1928, her findings regarding the Blackwood Circle were effectively buried beneath the scandal. The outbreak of World War I and subsequent global turmoil further obscured the Blackwood legacy. However, tantalizing connections have periodically emerged, suggesting the program not only continued but expanded throughout the 20th century. In 1942, a classified military intelligence report referenced Operation Ancestry, a project investigating unusual physiological and cognitive characteristics among certain American bloodlines with potential applications for warfare. The report specifically mentioned families from eastern Tennessee as primary subjects of interest. More compelling was the establishment of the Cumberland Research Institute in 1952, constructed on land that had once been part of the Blackwood estate. Officially dedicated to agricultural genetics and soil science, the facility's true purpose was revealed in documents declassified in 1997. CRI will continue previous research protocols under more secure conditions. Subjects Alpha through Echo will be transferred from Atlanta facility. Bloodline monitoring program to continue under classified protocol Theta 6. All references to historical origins of research material strictly prohibited in documentation. Project Progenitor remains compartmentalized at highest classification level. Former employees of the Institute, speaking anonymously to investigators in the 1980s, described witnessing unusual medical procedures and experiments involving special patients housed in a restricted subterranean level. Several mentioned observing children with remarkable abilities, exceptional memory, advanced problem-solving skills, and in some cases, unexplained physiological adaptations like enhanced night vision and unusual tolerance for pain. Perhaps most disturbing were references to breeding pairs, young adults carefully matched based on genetic profiles and kept isolated from the general population. Children resulting from these pairings were allegedly separated from their parents shortly after birth and subjected to intensive development programs. The Cumberland Research Institute was officially closed in 1973, following congressional investigations into ethical violations at several government-funded research facilities. However, satellite imagery and property records suggest that while the visible structures were indeed demolished, extensive underground facilities remain operational beneath the ostensibly abandoned site. Local residents report continuous security presence and unusual patterns of activity. Unmarked vehicles arriving at night, strange humming sounds emanating from ventilation structures disguised as natural features, and most ominously, periodic reports of missing hikers and campers in the surrounding wilderness. In 2004, a former security contractor for the facility attempted to contact investigative journalists with what he claimed was evidence of ongoing human experimentation. Before any meetings could take place, the contractor died in an apparent suicide, though the fact that he suffered 2 gunshot wounds to the head raised obvious questions about the official determination. The digital evidence he had allegedly compiled disappeared completely. Journalists who pursued the story reported unusual difficulties, equipment malfunctions, unexpected tax audits, and in one case, arrest on seemingly fabricated charges that were later dismissed but effectively ended the reporter's career. What remains undeniable is the statistical anomaly represented by descendants of the families first documented in Whitaker's 19th century investigation. They continue to display unusual longevity, rare genetic advantages, and a pattern of positioning themselves at critical junctures in American power structures. A genetic researcher at Johns Hopkins University, analyzing publicly available DNA testing data in 2017, identified what he termed architectural anomalies in genetic samples from individuals whose ancestry traced back to specific counties in eastern Tennessee, northern Georgia, and western North Carolina. These markers don't appear to be the result of natural evolutionary processes, the researcher noted in a paper that was accepted for publication, but mysteriously withdrawn days before print. The specific arrangements of certain genetic sequences suggest deliberate modification, though the technology required for such precise manipulation supposedly didn't exist until the late 20th century. The researcher took an unplanned sabbatical shortly thereafter, and has declined all interviews since returning to academic work, now focusing exclusively on non-human genetic research. Perhaps the most compelling evidence for the continuation of the Blackwood program comes from the testimonies of individuals who claim to be escapees from what they call the program. These accounts, while varying in specific details, share disturbing commonalities, descriptions of underground facilities where generations have been raised in isolation, references to genetic testing from infancy, and selective breeding based on exhibited traits. Mention of mysterious benefactors referred to as the board, or sometimes the circle, accounts of siblings or peers who disappeared after failing to develop expected attributes, consistent references to something called convergence, apparently the ultimate goal of the breeding program, scheduled for completion in the mid-21st century. One such testimony, recorded in 2019 by a woman identifying herself only as Subject 73, described being raised in an underground facility she later discovered was located beneath the former Blackwood property. We were told we were special, the culmination of work spanning centuries. Our education was accelerated, focused on specific areas based on our individual genetic profiles. Some of us were trained in mathematics and logic, others in persuasion and leadership, still others in physical optimization. We weren't treated cruelly, but there was no love either. Only clinical assessment of our development and constant reminders of our purpose. We were to be vessels for something greater than ourselves, though what exactly that meant was never fully explained. The oldest among us would sometimes whisper about the joining, apparently the point at which we would fulfill our purpose. Those who reached certain developmental milestones would be removed from the general population for what was called final preparation. We never saw them again. What haunts me most are the murals in the lowest levels, images of human figures evolving into something different. The final forms weren't fully human anymore, and beneath these images, always the same inscription, as was promised to the founder. Subject 7-3 disappeared less than 48 hours after providing this testimony. The researcher who recorded her account suffered a fatal stroke the following week, despite being 34 years old with no prior health issues. The recording itself was corrupted beyond recovery in what experts described as an unprecedented type of data degradation. Today, the land once owned by Thomas Blackwood remains largely inaccessible to the public, surrounded by government warning signs citing environmental hazards from 19th century industrial contamination. Satellite imagery shows unusual thermal patterns suggesting extensive underground structures, though official inquiries are met with denials or vague references to abandoned coal mines. What cannot be denied is that the altered auction lists, first discovered by James Morrison in 1855, opened a window into a conspiracy that potentially continues to this day. What began as one man's scheme to preserve his family legacy appears to have been part of a far older and more extensive program, one whose true purpose and origins remain shrouded in deliberate obscurity. The questions that haunt investigators today are the same ones that troubled Morrison and Whitaker more than a century and a half ago. Who or what is the true architect of this multi-generational breeding program? What is the source of their advanced genetic knowledge? And most critically, what is the ultimate purpose of creating these carefully engineered bloodlines? In 2020, an anonymous data leak from a private biotech company included a partial document that referenced Project Renaissance and included the statement, "Final phase subjects now distributed across all target positions. Convergence protocols initiating as scheduled." The progenitor's vision nears fulfillment after 3 centuries of preparation. The company denied the document's authenticity before ceasing operations entirely 3 days later. Its research archives were reportedly destroyed in a fire that forensic experts described as reaching temperatures typically unattainable with conventional accelerants. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the Blackwood legacy is how effectively it has been erased from historical record. Beyond a few fragmented documents and testimonies from those who risked everything to expose the truth, little concrete evidence remains accessible to researchers. This systematic erasure itself suggests an organization with resources and influence far beyond what Thomas Blackwood could have personally commanded in 1855. Pointing to a conspiracy older, larger, and more powerful than one 19th century plantation owner's ambitions. Today, if you visit Cumberland County and inquire about the Blackwood family or plantation, you'll likely be met with blank stares or vague references to old folk tales not worth repeating. Local historians will tell you that courthouse fires and Civil War destruction eliminated most records from that period. Yet sometimes, elderly residents will lower their voices when the name is mentioned, making subtle warding gestures before changing the subject. Some will point toward the restricted area in the distance, now overgrown and seemingly abandoned, and simply say, "Some places ain't meant for visiting." What they won't mention is that every few years young women still disappear from communities throughout the region, often from families experiencing sudden financial difficulties. The official explanations vary: runaways seeking opportunities in bigger cities, victims of unidentified predators, tragic accidents in remote areas. What these cases share is the pattern of financial salvation that typically follows: the missing girl's family suddenly finding their debts resolved, legal troubles evaporating, medical expenses mysteriously paid in full. Just as Thomas Blackwood once rewrote auction lists to acquire property and young women for his breeding program, it seems his successors continue to manipulate financial systems to acquire genetic material for their ongoing work, whatever its ultimate purpose may be. In the cool shadows of the Tennessee hills, centuries-old secrets continue to breed. The auction lists that first revealed this horror may have burned in 1855, but the program they served appears to live on, hidden beneath layers of denial, misdirection, and calculated erasure. The true extent of the Blackwood legacy remains unknown. How many generations have been sacrificed to this program? How many bloodlines have been manipulated for its inscrutable purpose? And perhaps most terrifying, how close is this centuries-old plan to completion? As you consider these questions, you might reflect on your own family history, on unexplained good fortune that saved your ancestors from disaster, on distinctive traits that run through your bloodline, on strange gaps in your family tree where records should exist but somehow don't. Could you unknowingly be part of the grand design first revealed in those altered auction lists so long ago? Could the peculiar abilities or characteristics you've always attributed to natural inheritance actually be the result of calculated genetic manipulation spanning centuries? The truth may lie buried beneath the former Blackwood plantation, or it may be written in your very DNA, a legacy you carry without knowing its source or purpose. As night falls over the Cumberland Hills, some say you can still hear the whispered prayers of young women captured for Blackwood's program, their voices carried on the wind that sweeps down from the ridge where his mansion once stood. They call not for their own salvation, too long denied, but for someone to finally expose the truth before the mysterious convergence reaches its culmination. Will you be the one to finally unravel this centuries-old conspiracy? Or will you, like so many before, dismiss it as mere legend while the work continues in shadows? The choice, as always, is yours. But remember, those who ask too many questions about the Blackwood legacy have a troubling tendency to disappear, their own stories rewritten just as Thomas Blackwood once rewrote those auction lists, erasing all evidence of his terrible purpose. Turn to God and Jesus Christ for protection against such evil that lurks in the shadows of human history. Only through faith can we find the strength to confront darkness that has festered for generations. Sleep well, knowing that somewhere beneath the Tennessee hills, the descendants of Thomas Blackwood's program continue their work, patiently advancing toward a goal set in motion centuries ago, a goal that may involve us all.